Good morning, everyone. This is the sixth day of the new year of 2019. So welcome, Happy New Year. And it's an opportunity to make the new year a wonderful new year. And as always, I remind you that this is being recorded, and anything that you say will be available to others. So we're sharing our wisdom or making it available. The whole idea of these meetings is that we co-create our wisdom to solve important critical problems. That's the value of the Genie seminar. We respect the Einstein's warning to us that since he realized that the creation of these new weapons with ultimate destructive power will soon be proliferated by multiple tribes, and his accurate prediction was that they would be used unless we did one thing, that we taught ourselves a newer way of thinking that leads to cooperation among individuals rather than competition to put others down. And we've indicated that there are two memes that seem to guide our culture. A meme being a sentence or an idea that sets the norm for our culture, and the dominant meme that we have in today's era that we live in is what's good for me and my family and my tribe for here and now. That's a view that comes from a billion years of background in our animal brain. And we see that in animals. We see it in groups that associate in tribes. And so we've adapted in our language. Our words are all geared to what's good for me and my family and my tribe. So we all get a political word when we're younger. We get a patriotic word. We usually get a flag that we're taught to be allegiant to. And we usually get a religious symbol. And that's where we have evolved to at this point, where we are relatively tribal around the world. And the meme that guides us, what's good for me and my family and my tribe for here and now. And we've discussed that if we had a new meme, a simple sentence that would change everything, we would lead to cooperation for our mutual benefit. That sentence being, what's good for my tribe and your tribe for now and the future. So we've come up with the idea that a simple change of words changes our assumption about who we are and the world we live in. And instead of seeing ourselves living in tribes that compete with one another and allegiance to one tribe at the expense of other, that if we could cooperate for our mutual benefit, instead of using our resources for guns and to tear others down and to create weapons of destruction, we could use them for research, for better medical care, for dealing with poverty and education and all the other things that we seem to want. So that's one of the basic issues that we're dealing with here. Can we change that meme from the meme that gets us into trouble to a newer meme that will work in this new era where we have weapons that for the first time offer no second chance? I think that was Einstein's wisdom when he basically said, and these are not exactly his words, but essentially said that the way we think is no longer sustainable for us, that we must have a newer way of thinking that leads to sharing and cooperation of our energy, which we might think of as reciprocity or unconditional love, rather than tribal love, which is what we've been identifying with through our history, where we identify with our particular country or religion or political party. And as long as we do that, of course, then it becomes necessary that we make more and more powerful weapons. So we have reviewed several word changes. We've said that what makes us separate from other species, and again, we go back to Einstein, who told us one of the most important things in history is that we have learned to use imagination. Why is imagination so critical and such a unique introduction in our history? That only humans engage in imagination. We use words, we use language, that we create stories. And when we create stories, we can create an accurate history. And from our accurate history, we have the ability, if we have an accurate trajectory of our history, we can predict the future. And that's what makes us unique. And here's the critical issue. In our imagination, we have the ability to make mistakes. The animals make mistakes, and there are consequences when you make a mistake in the common world that we share. But when we can think and we come up with multiple alternatives, and then we make these alternatives in our imagination, then there's no consequences. We don't have any penalty to pay. We decide we've made a mistake, we can correct our mistake. And of course, that's the idea of creativity. That's the idea of our brilliance. If we can find solutions in our imagination and then agree and introduce them, we have the ability to direct our energy for wisdom and universal or global love instead of tribal love. So that's part of our background. We reviewed these things. We have these 7 changes, 7 new words that elevate us, elevate the center of our intentions from our animal brain, which is that first meme, to our Genie organ, or our special organ that has the ability to grant us wishes. So we create a new meme, and we can do that if we work together and learn to cooperate with one another. So just briefly, let's review these 7 words before we get into our strand for today. We have a very good strand today. I think a wonderful strand for today. But these 7 words again, it starts off with "I think I can" instead of the thoughts that we have. The animal brain is continually giving us thoughts of what worked in the past. When we say "I think I can," thinking is the basis of imagination. Thinking is where we exercise our imagination. We can make many mistakes that have no penalty, and then we can decide what we would like to choose to actually put into the common reality we share. And then the second word switch we said was "I allow." Instead of blaming others, we say we take responsibility for ourselves. If we could just assume responsibility, what a difference in the world that would make. If we say, how can we move forward? Because if I am the cause of some of these issues, then I'm in a better position to change them. Of course, if it's the world that does it, or other people that are doing it, they're the bad people, then that leads to aggression and usually fighting. And then the third word switch was "I could." We're inviting our Genie organ to solve problems. We're saying to our imagination, what could we do? What are the alternatives? Instead of the old word, which is "should." As children and growing up, we have that finger pointed in our face that says, this is what you should do, and there's no alternative. The "should" word, it tells us what other people wants us to do. And we grow up with that "should" word, and we get a lot of shoulding on ourselves, and we end up shoulding on others. And when this word switch "I could" would be a wonderful alternative, because it invites us to creativity. And then the fourth word switch, a very simple word switch, is when we simply say both "and" instead of "either or." The animal brain is only able to process information into us or them, good or bad, right or wrong. So we end up thinking of the world, we divide it into 2 categories: the good side, which of course is always our side, and the bad side, which is the other side, which does not deserve to be treated as human. So we dehumanize people that are not part of our tribe, or not part of our religion or our political party, and we go around usually having very bad words to say about people that are not of our tribe. So when we say both "and" instead of "either or," it is a dramatic change. It's such a powerful, powerful word switch. And then if we put these 4 word switches together, we come up with what I call the magical problem-solving sentence. It works so effectively that it seems like magic. I'm not a particular believer in absolute magic, but it is magical. It seems like it just works so effectively on a regular basis. And that 5th word switch is actually a short sentence, which is, what will make things better for my tribe and your tribe for now and the future? That sentence, if you listen to it, simply says, how can we use our energy to work together for a positive outcome to attain what we want? It is such a wonderful sentence. Instead, we usually say, why is my side the right side, and why is the other side the source of our misery that deserves to be punished? And then, now that we've gone through those 5 simple word switches that really change the way we think, we need to do something to put the brake on for the old way we've been thinking that usually gets us into trouble. So that's when we come up with word switch 6 and 7. And if you remember, the 6 word switch is, can we substitute the word energy for anger or fear or anxiety? Anger leads to fighting. Fear and anxiety leads to flighting. So here we have the basis of the fight-flight response, which was perfectly appropriate for animals in a very uncivilized world. Fight or flight was appropriate. It was all that we could do when we were confronted with danger, because we didn't have the ability to communicate very well with words. And so in the animal kingdom, where we don't have language, the best way they could deal with you things would usually be to be tribal and engage in fight or flight. So here we have the first word switch that puts the foot on the brake a little bit. We recognize energy is an awakening response. So when we have a difficult situation, if we recognize the changes that go in our body, and you all know what they are, these fight or flight, we call them the fight or flight responses, but when we secrete adrenaline, it sends blood to our brain, it makes us more aware, it gives us more energy, it takes the blood away from digestion, so that we're more alert. You're not likely to fall asleep or be involved with eating food when you're confronted with somebody who's trying to kill you or doing some danger to you. So that response, when we realize that's really an energy response to say, wake up and let's see what we can do here. That's different than fight or flight. So that one simple change is a nice, wonderful break to get rid of the old pattern. And then the final word switch we said was when we substitute urgency for emergency. You remember when the animal response is an automatic response. When something happens, we automatically respond with fight or flight response. It's been built into us for over 1 billion years of history and built into our genes or our basic biology, that fight or flight response. So we deal with things as emergency. So we have things like road rage. We have the situation where many of the people locked up for life are not because they're career criminals, because something happened that was so dramatic that they picked up a knife or they did something that was so egregious they couldn't just simply say, I'm sorry, if they shot somebody or did something that was dramatic. So many of the people that we find doing the most serious crimes did so in a moment of passion or whatever, in a mindless fit, and then they had to pay the consequences. So when we substitute urgency for emergency, and we ask the simple question, is it high, medium, or low emergency? And almost 100% of the situation in today's world will find that the conclusion is it is a very low urgency. And if it's low urgency, the best way to solve it is to think about it, have discussions, sleep on it, and negotiate some better, wiser solution rather than immediate response. So you see how powerful these simple 7 word switches are. And I think you'll agree that none of them are that difficult. They're all easy to learn, but if we've been used to decades of thinking as tribal individuals, what's good for me and my family and my tribe for here and now, that's why we get involved with saying we can borrow indefinitely and let our kids pay for our debt. We can see how our world has changed based on that simple meme. So, okay, so that's the review, and now we're going to have what I think is one of the most powerful strands that we haven't discussed, and it's a short one, but it's a very powerful one, and it's a true story. So we're going to turn to that now if we can. So take it over, Brad. Here you go. Welcome to Module 1, Strand number 5 of the Educational Community Curriculum on Making Our Life Wonderful. Today's happiness and love creation skill is one of the most useful wisdom that we can acquire. I call it the Strengths Strand.
This simple wisdom will make a quantum leap in creating a newer way of thinking. It is one of the most powerful wisdoms. I acquired it from an individual who overcame the most devastating of life circumstances. John is a paraplegic. His broken neck changed his life when he was a teen. It was a game of football turned tragedy. From that day, he no longer had control of his legs or arms. Physically, he knew he would be dependent on others for whatever time he would live. Yet when I met John, he was applying for a job as a senior therapist. A helper took him to classes and literally turned the pages. He earned his doctorate in psychology. He met a woman with shared interests and they married. He and his wife were raising their adopted daughter. He was not simply alive. He was living and loving his life. How had he turned himself around? What made the difference? I had to ask, and I'm so glad I did, for I received the gift of this strength, which I can now pass on to you. Here is his response as close as I can remember. For several years I was miserable. My thoughts were constant that I didn't want to live. And then one day, I had the thought that changed my life. As long as I thought about what I'd lost, what I didn't have, or might not attain, I realized I would continue to feel miserable. I began to focus my attention on what I had attained, and what I had available to me right now, and what I might yet attain. This simple idea changed everything. 2 recent best-selling books, Tuesdays with Maury and The Last Lecture, provide inspirational examples of individuals who made their life experience meaningful in spite of the terrible hardships fate provided. ALS, Lou Gehrig's muscle wasting disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and cancer of the pancreas. Surely these individuals managed through their way of thinking. What can you learn from such examples? How would you compare your life situation, and how do you deal with it? Too often, too many people dwell on what they have lost, what they don't have now, or what they may never obtain. This is the sure formula to create misery. I have sent this strand to friends at holiday time and received many grateful comments to verify its effectiveness. My most recent letter was from a young woman whose father died recently. She turned her thoughts and feelings around when she began to focus on her happy experiences with her dad and all she had received. There were 2 prisoners looking through the bars. The one saw mud, the other saw stars. Anon. When we experience any loss, one of the many of life's unfairnesses and or setbacks, it is normal to hurt. Why unnecessarily add to the necessary hurt by dwelling on the loss, guilt, or the missing part of our life? Who would go to the supermarket, pay for their food, and then get back in line to pay for the food again? It's hard enough to have to deal with the loss. Why compound it? Though it may take time and not be easy, we do have the resources to get over the blows fate deals us. Keep this in mind and stop the negative, non-productive mental dwelling.
Thank you for that. To me, that is one of the most powerful strands that I've learned in my lifetime, I believe. It has so much to say with the assumptions we make about our life situation. I had actually interviewed this individual, and as he described it, it was like a thought that came out of the blue. He said he had been miserable for so long, he just wanted to die. And when this idea came to him, it struck him, and all of a sudden, that one thought dramatically, in a moment, changed his life. He applied for a government program. There was a special program. He had a helper that took him to college, took him to school, to college. He was a very bright person. He had a good head on his shoulders. And when he looked at me, he said, "You know, here I am." He said, I've met this wonderful woman behind me, and we fell in love. We have similar ideas. We have wonderful discussions. We adopted a daughter, and the daughter is the light of my life. And every day I have the opportunity to talk with other people and be helpful to help them feel better about themselves. What a marvelous attitude for an individual who's quadriplegic. Can you imagine how you would deal with a situation like that yourself? How most people would deal with a situation like that. So that's the powerful idea for today. Can you relate that to your own life? What are your own assumptions about who you are and what you do? How often do we waste energy on whining and complaining?
I think I even said it in one of our earlier encounters, that I used to think in terms of these terrible things that could happen to me, these catastrophic events in my life that would just be earth-shaking to me, and I faced them. They occurred, and they're really meaningless to me at this point, because I woke up this morning. Okay, glass half empty or half full, all those lovely little aphorisms that we use. And no one told me that I'm going to die Tuesday. No one told me that I'm going to be homeless. So I'm doing fine. But I really thought that these events, individually or collectively, would really be so catastrophic I couldn't come out from under them. And I look back on that and I can't even get in touch with those feelings. I wonder why I ever felt that way.
To me, I wonder, Dad, you posed a question, or said Einstein posed a question, can we learn to think in a different way or behave in a different way? And I wonder if, part of what Brad says speaks to the answer to that. We keep talking about the ways that we must think in a different way to change our trajectory. But, the notion of, and I'm familiar with the idea of a thought experiment, which I agree with that notion. But even, Brad's experience was he had to have the experience. He had to have those things, like many of us have these setbacks that we think are going to be insurmountable, and we, in one way or another, get over them. So the fact that we can get over these expectations that are so negative that we're going to fail or that it's going to be so bad, in some way, for the species that we are, is intrinsic to our learning, our evolution. Brad's was a good example, as we all have examples of, we lived and survived through things we didn't think that we would. So I think this takes us back to the question, is it possible to change the way we think? Is it possible to rely on a thought experiment, the notion that, we don't have a chance to get it wrong, that's what's going to motivate us to get it right? Because I think, for at least most of our form of it, I would be interested if anyone has experiences where they've done the thought experiment, they evolve themselves without having the negative event in their life to open their eyes to other possibilities. Because I can't think of any in my life. I know that as we were growing up, and even still as adults, I know you have said in the past that sometimes you think it's hard for us to appreciate all the things we have because we grew up having most of the things we needed. We didn't have any major traumas in our life, and which you did. You had experiences that we didn't and had problems. So I think I would be interested, is there any precedent or does anyone have any experience with successfully doing what you're suggesting everyone on earth needs to do? I think it's a good notion, but I'd like to know if it's ever worked before.
Well, I think it's worked a little bit for me, but I'm in an unusual situation where it's retirement. So I have noticed when I don't have the clamor of things that I feel like I have to get done to feed myself, and can kind of sit back a little bit and think, well, what is really important? That I can sort of stop and think about something a little bit and don't have to worry about getting to the next thing before somebody gets me. I do feel like my thoughts have changed a little bit. But what kind of struck me is that's a luxury that most people don't take. I'm not sure. I would first say they don't have, but maybe a better way to say it is they don't take it. That you're more concerned about how I'm going to keep all the people around me or all the demands on me happy, and try to spend a lot of time optimizing and how I'm going to run around and get stuff done. I just thought today that I went out and I had a feed of, put some chemicals in the hot tub and go take some food scraps and put it out for their animals to eat in the backyard, and go fill a bird feeder. And, usually and even there's this tendency that I've got to go run and get this done. I'm going to go get this done before I can get to this meeting or go make my wife a cup of coffee. You can hear the kind of things I'm concerned about these days. But still, there's this tendency of, I just got to see if I can shoehorn something in a very limited amount of time and get it done, and then sort of happy that I've got something done, but at the same time be concerned that, okay, now I've got some time to go get the next thing done. As opposed to sort of sit back and say, well, why do I really need to be rushing around? Can I be reflexive? And, it's sort of an honor to sit back and say, well, I really can be a little bit reflect a little bit on things. But I think it's a kind of an honor to run that kind of thought experiment. At least I know I haven't spent a lot of time doing it as much before I retired as after I was retired. But now actually sitting down and doing it, I think there has been some changes and stuff as well. So I think it's possible, but it's something that naturally just didn't occur until some of the pressures, that I had in the working world were relaxed.
So, Pacey, I think you raise an interesting point. Can we appreciate and change our way of thinking without going through the drama, right? If I'm paraphrasing. I'm going to say yes, you can. And I think that's what, reflecting, as Abby was talking about, and calming down when things are calm. I think maybe now, if Abby, I'm not wishing this upon you, but if something comes up stressful, that you consider stressful now, you may be able to handle it better than when you did when life was incredibly stressful. I mean, that's maybe what we call wisdom, or, I don't know, growth. So I don't know if you need to go through it, Casey. I think if we begin to change our minds when we're calm, that's the only time we can change our minds. I don't know if we have the luxury of changing our minds and how we approach things in the midst of a lot of stress. Then we're just reacting, right? And I know everyone has their sayings. I guess the one that I've clung to that helped me the most through stressful situations, especially when they're ongoing, is today is the tomorrow that you worried about yesterday, right? And I just say, whatever it is today, you're gonna get through it, and so, and I that's the best I can do in a stressful situation because too many things are going on. So long story short, what I'm trying to say is I think the only time you can begin to change your mind is when you're calm, so that when the stressful situations do come up, you're better prepared. It's kind of the practice to be prepared.
I think of a slight twist to that, Josephine, is that when I think back of the things that I worried about, that I assumed that I didn't have time to do. I'm not sure that there was this, there was sort of a decision that these just don't need to be that stressful. I was thinking back this morning about a guy that was very successful in an earlier part of my career. And one of the things I remember about this guy was we had this duty to clean the microwave in this office building that we were in. It was a small office, and everybody had this duty of cleaning out the microwave. And I remember when he would do it, he was just kind of completely relaxed. He was a manager and, undergoing probably a lot more things that needed to get done than I was doing. But when he was doing that microwave, that's all he thought about. He was kind of taking his time. I don't know if he enjoyed himself, but he certainly wasn't bothered. When that duty came to me, it's a matter of, and I got to get this thing done. I've heard the term grim determination. Got this piece, I got to get this done. I got to get this out, and then I'm going to go run back and get the other stuff done. And this is just something that's derailing the other things that I'm really supposed to be doing. And just watching this guy sort of it's time to do the microwave. Everything else sort of got set aside. He took his time, he did it, and then he moved on. And there was just something about that approach that is sort of stuck with me. And I thought of that was probably a personality trait that, some people, are good at looking and doing one thing at a time and doing it and moving on. And, that to me, not having quite that orientation, I'm always thinking about the 3 or 4 things that need to be done. And, most of my time while I'm doing something is figuring out what the next thing I should be doing is. And that's a not as healthy way of looking at things as just saying, I'm going to get one thing done and I'm going to go do it. I'm going to enjoy it while I'm doing it, and then I'll move on.
I find when I'm really uptight and stressed and I'm dealing with somebody who's really laid back and unstressed, I get very annoyed. Like, why aren't they as uptight as I am? Why don't they take this seriously as I am? I guess I'd have to get over that first.
No, Mom, you're right. They're just stupid. I don't know. I have some of the wiring that the fellow who was cleaning out the microwave. I'm a little bit, and I think it more has to do with some degree of ADD that I have, that when I'm kind of in something, a lot of other things disappear, and I can kind of enjoy what I'm doing. It gets me in trouble because I forget about other things I'm supposed to do and don't do a lot of those things that come back at me. But I think there's this sense that most people have that I'm in a race. I've got to get this work done so that I can get home, so that I can put stuff in retirement. And of course, you can never put enough in retirement. And, there's just this kind of ongoing race. And I think it's difficult. And I think that competitive perspective is something that I don't know if is evolved into us or is culturally, we're culturally brainwashed that, you have to behave that way. But I think most people have that sense. It's very hard in the midst of the race to stop and slow down and let other people pass you, while we're having an epiphany of, boy, it's a nice day out here. Maybe I don't want to run around this track. Maybe I want to stop and go on the infield and pick some flowers and contemplate my navel while these guys run around to get to the finish line. I think there's something that's, I think it's hard in that setting, in the setting that most of us are embedded in, to make that change. And I agree with you. it is a luxury to be able to slow down and contemplate when all of our needs are met. And I'm not retired yet, but I have kind of similar luxury that I know kind of intellectually that I can probably leave earlier from work or go in later, but I haven't evolved to that point yet. But I just wonder, does anyone have any examples of where they've accomplished this, where there is something that was really threatening or really upsetting that they were able to diffuse and change their course that seemed really predestined, just based on kind of doing the thought experiment, deciding I don't want to go there, because I don't. If we're trying to get the whole world to do this, I think we should be able to recognize there's some people who have already done it already. Otherwise, we're just wonderful thinking. And Dad, you said you don't believe in magic.
Well, I think I'm an absolute excellent example of this. On January 9th in 2001, I was cruising along, thought I knew what I was doing and how I was going to get there. I'm working as a nurse, and I had this big wreck, left me paralyzed on the left side. And so all of a sudden, I thought my life was over, couldn't do anything. I didn't have a car, didn't have a job, couldn't walk, and all I had known how to do was work. And it was just a really huge lesson on, you know how to be a human doing, but you have no idea how to be a human being whatsoever. So it really changed my perspective on how I looked at things, and instead of throwing in the towel, as you can see, if I don't tell anybody I was paralyzed on the left side now, they don't know. I can, of course I know my walk is still kind of, but it was just an incredible overcoming of a lot of huge, and I've always had a little bit of that in my life, in I never had a father. And so you look around and now, I never had to, but it was interesting because I also could see that daddy's little girl had to be something for daddy too, and I never had to meet any expectations, but I always felt, left out, that I never had a dad kind of thing. But I hopefully think that now I have a really good positive attitude on things and see us all as one big human family. And maybe that's because I have so little family. I'm not sure. Anyway, I think I'm a bit of an example of this. I'll return to talk about it.
I wonder, I admire what you went through, but you had the horrific thing happen, and you were a survivor and a person who personally evolved in ways that you thought probably weren't possible. So what I'm looking for is an example of someone, if we're saying in order to master this skill, we have to do the thought experiment. We can't do the real life experiment. We can't have the real experience of having it happen and seeing if we evolve. I'm wondering, does anyone have the experience of, they were able to make, or know of anyone who was able to make such a sea change without having the thing happen and then finding a way to survive through it? The only people that I'm aware of are the ascetics, the people who kind of give up everything and say, I'm just going to focus on my existence. I'm not going to, work. I'm not going to, I'm just going to focus on the here and now in my existing. And I don't know that we're going to talk humanity into becoming ascetic.
Give me an example, Pacey, of what you mean. I'm trying hard to I guess the way most people would answer your question is, well, I was presented a challenge, and before the thought exercises, I would react in one way. Now that I've experienced the thought exercises, I'm going to approach it in a different way.
Right.
But it seems you're asking something different. It seems that you're almost asking, how would people just approach life? Or I'm not exactly sure what you're saying. Is it acting differently or reacting differently in the midst of a stressful situation? Is that what you're asking?
I guess I'm asking, we have these wonderful stories of people who have these epiphanies and are changed dramatically in their behavior and their worldview, and as a result of something usually horrific in their life. You don't hear a lot of these stories of people who win the lottery. People who win the lottery, this typical story is their life is ruined. Everyone comes with money and they spend all the money, and then so it's not when something really great happens. It tends to be when something really terrible happens. There's a subset of people who evolve in a way that's really admirable, that I think we all look at and say, God, I wish I could do that, but I don't want to be paralyzed for a year or 2 or 5 in order to have that epiphany. I'm just going to picture myself in that accident. I'm going to picture myself in that football game. And then I want to have the evolution and the life satisfaction that these other people who had the strength to come through it. I'm just looking, is there an example, if this is something we're proposing, that everyone do, that, you don't have the luxury of having a Holocaust to figure out that it's not good for you. You don't get a second chance. You can't come back and be a better person after a Holocaust. That makes rational sense, but I'm asking, is there anything in the real world? Has anyone seen or had an experience themselves or witnessed someone who's gone through such a change without having something terrible happen first that prompted it? Because I can't think of any in my own life, and I don't know of any stories.
Well, I think, I'm thinking about New Year's resolutions that a lot of us make at the beginning of the year, and usually with not outcomes that aren't very different than what we did the year before, whether it be a more positive attitude or losing weight or stopping smoking or, whatever your goal happens to be. It's almost nobody achieves what they that they say their New Year's resolution is. I guess when you start to want to change, you have to sort of make baby steps and be encouraged along the way. And I can think of maybe small things, but nothing dramatic and nothing that has a real staying power, for me anyway.
There is, in Pacey's question, underlies an assumption that anyone who goes through a tragedy can think through and come out with this epiphany. But that is not true, right? There are so many people who go through various tragedies and they never come out successfully. So they fail, many of them. So the assumption that only when there is a tragedy there will be a epiphany and these bright ideas will come is empirical. It is not true. So what that tells me is that it is the intention of that human being. It is that individual who has gone through the tragedy, but it is that person's interest and his ability to think through and find a solution, either through external stimuli like reading a book, talking to some person, or doing seeing somebody or getting inspired from someone, or in some cases, like in case of the great sages of India like Swami Vivekananda, which is more internal, where he came based on his own understanding. He had this burning desire. He was the son of a rich family, not many problems in his life. Of course, births and deaths happen in family, but he completely turned around and he became the spokesperson for the entire Hindu society in America, in Europe, and he came to Chicago in the late 1800s, and he came to the World Religious Conference, and he was like a big hit there, and he was offered honorary doctorate and like professorship in many American universities. So, but the point I'm trying to make is it's the individual who makes that decision to come out of that tragedy or elevate that their current non-tragic life into a much more meaningful life by their own thought. And that's what the thought experiment, I think. Yeah, one thing is that that a tragedy or a deep loss or sorrow might reduce the turnaround time, because somebody in sorrow wants to get out of it much more quicker than somebody who is having a very hunky-dory life.
Just one. I wasn't suggesting that everyone who goes through tragedy comes out better. I agree with you that most people are damaged and don't bounce back. But I was really referring to the evolution that we're looking to impart on ourselves and humanity. The only place that have really seen it is in the small subset of people who have a terrible experience and come out changed. And I was just posing the question, does anyone have any examples of people who have had that kind of evolution or change without having the negative experience? Because this reasoning is proposing that it is possible for us to think in a way that causes us to change dramatically like that. And I'm questioning whether that's true, whether there's any life experience that people have witnessed that.
Let me take a guess at that. Like, I don't know for sure, but there is a guess. Let us take the story that Brad said, and Don actually wrote it, and Brad said, what if that guy was not paraplegic? What if he had everything working fine for him? He was a multi-millionaire or multi-billionaire, having a perfect life, perfect family, chauffeur and everything. And Don would tell this story to us. So here lies this guy who is a multi-billionaire. He has 5 robots and 250 what is it called, servants, and these servants take him to the school. He studies there, comes out, and he is now a doctor. Would that be an inspiring story? So I am taking a guess here is that most of these stories that we get, and they are mostly inspiring stories because people went through this tragedy and came out with an epiphany and completely changed their life, and they make very good inspirational stories.
I think that that there can be, this guy might have been rich anyway, but I think that I do know of some cases, and I think one of the issues is that if there is some sort of major internal change, you really wouldn't hear about it. You'd be a bit blind to it. I'm thinking of 2 examples. One, I lost one of them, but one was, I mentioned earlier that there's a guy that I used to work with. Everybody was, it was a big corporation, and everybody was like always, you never admit anything was wrong. Everything was good. You could never make a mistake. You get penalized. And this guy kind of got up and he said, you never announced that you were going to leave the company, because that was sort of like a betrayal of of your mother. And it was just culturally not especially your mother. But this guy just kind of came out one day and said, this just isn't working for me. I think in about 4 months I'm going to leave. And I actually followed up with him a little bit later. He moved down to South Carolina and he became the manager of a Walgreens or a pharmacy. And he seemed happy, but he just I guess he went through experiment. In my mind, he tried something out and said that this doesn't work for me. I'm going to go try something else. And it's guys like that. You just hear somebody move on. It's not quite the story, but it might be a small percent of the population, but it's it is a percent. It's a reasonable percent. And I'm thinking my neighbor. My neighbor has a daughter, a couple doors down, and her husband, his dad was saying she's moved to Colorado, and she was saying that her boyfriend one day was kind of she was sort of living with this guy and getting along okay, and she said, well, I'm thinking about moving to Colorado, and she talked to the boyfriend about it, and the boyfriend just said, well, I don't think I want to do that. That rate might be more. She thought about it for a week and she said, I think I really do want to do that. And he left. Or she left and she went to Colorado, and she just sort of picked up and, kind of went through it and did it. And, there's cases like that where there are change, but you just wouldn't hear about them. I mean, there's not, they don't have the emotional impact. But, to Pacey's question, could it or does it happen? I think it can happen. It does. It might not happen a lot, but I do think there's precedent for it.
Hey, Avi,
So
I have just
Casey, to
one.
answer your question really quickly,
Can I ask
sorry.
one question to Avi? Avi, you said your neighbor had a daughter couple of doors down. Are you talking about him having a daughter nearby him, or your neighbor lives couple of doors down?
Neighbor lives a couple of doors down with a doorknob.
No, because what you said was very dangerous. What is happening in your neighborhood?
Process is the problem.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just
So Pacey, I thought seriously about your question. I had to tune out for 1 second to answer because I want to answer your question. And I think the only example I could think about is in schools now, they're doing meditation exercises with children. And what they're finding is that the kids who are going through these, taking time out to do meditation during the day are less aggressive. There's less bullying. There are less fights. They're more focused. So I think, changing the way and this is, you can, I would argue strongly that meditation is a way of changing the way you think, right? I think that that's a very good example. It's kind of hard to answer your question when people are adults because you've gone through so many things in your life and you have already reacted to them, right? So it's hard to answer that question as an adult. But I think we see that, the example of changing the way you think can change outcomes in these kinds of classroom exercises.
I agree with that partially because I can't agree with anything completely.
Of course.
one thing is I'm not sure how I'm convincing myself in saying this, but I think Basu is a very good example. He had an amazing, he's always good in studies, and then he came to America, studied in Boston University, came back to India, worked for the best company, probably the best company. They gave him so many perks that you cannot believe. He was living in an apartment next to the the poshest of apartment in the poshest of place in India. He never had any major tragedy, but he then decided, let me leave all these things and start my own company. So that was a huge risk. I'm sure he would have faced a lot of backlash from his family. And he left all that, started his own company, and now 3 years, Basu, 3-4 years down the line, he's doing really well, and he's doing great things. He recently got awarded a big award from the local government, and so he's a perfect example of this case where without any tragedy he completely turned around his life.
Sharath, I am very confused. What do you need from me?
The bottom line is that we should all be like Basu.
Yes.
I think, Josephine, in responding to you, I agree with you. I think that what you describe is an example of, I would venture that yoga changes the way a person feels, and that trickles down to changing the way they think and behave. That I believe in, and I think something intangible like yoga may be a road in to closer to what we're trying to accomplish. But I believe that thinking precedes feeling. I'm sorry, just the opposite. I believe that feeling precedes thinking. And if we could get people to feel differently, then they're more likely to start to think differently. This proposal really starts with thinking and says we're going to change our thinking, and that's going to change the way we feel. And although I think both of those may be possible, I think our nature is such that we're much more tuned and we're much more impacted by having the way we feel cause a change in the way we think. And as I wonder if a strategy for this, because we keep going on, how do we change people's thinking, get them to use different words? I think a strategy to make this happen might also include or focus on how do we change the way people feel. And when they feel differently, they're much more likely to think differently and behave differently. Because I'm not sure how much progress we're making just working on thinking differently. I think feeling precedes thinking, and it's the feeling that keeps people in the race and keeps people aggressive. So although I haven't practiced it as much as I vowed I would, I see a lot of benefit to things like yoga that change the way we feel.
You're talking about physical exercise?
No, I'm talking about yoga. It really isn't physical exercise. Is really, kind of some quiet time, some mind body awareness, some kind of living in the moment, relaxation. Um, it's really trying to change the internal reality of how we feel. And I think once that storm calms, then we're capable of thinking differently and maybe behaving differently. But I think it starts with feeling and not so much with thinking. I think our thinking brain is overrated.
So basically, you need to try one of those hot yogas or what is power yogas before you say it is not exercise.
Hot yoga? What cable channel are you watching?
I heard it somewhere.
Of course, that's a likely story.
Douglas used to do hot yoga, which he really enjoyed. The problem is, if you go into hot yoga and you bring a hot dog with you, by the time you're done with your yoga class, your hot dog is cooked.
I find this line of thinking very disquieting. I really do.
I've done hot yoga. It's pretty intense.
Yeah.
But these kids that I'm talking about are not doing yoga. They're meditating. They're sitting there with quiet time. They're not doing any kind of physical exercises. And I would say, too, this notion of feeling, I'm not quite understanding the distinction. And I'm not sure how I would say these kids are changing their feelings and not changing their thinking.
Isn't yoga really a part of it, to have to think that you're going to relax? One of our word switches is both and instead of either or. We've said that we're addicted to this way of dividing the world into either or, right or wrong, and so on. But the very things that we're learning here, when we think of both and end, thinking, and can we imagine thinking and feeling and acting are all interrelated? They don't have to be either or, which comes first, that they're very much related, they're interchanged. So now think about evolution. The new story we have that changes us is that we are a work in progress. We are continually changing. Think about how we start in life. We start as an infant, and we really have very little going for us. I mean, we have the ability to learn. Animals have the ability to learn. They react. They can be conditioned. And one of my mentors is the wonderful book by Brock Chisholm, who was the first director of the World Health Organization. He was a psychiatrist, a general in World War I, who was a psychiatrist, became director of the World Health Organization. He wrote a book which I thought was very fundamental. He said, the title of the book was, Can We Learn to Learn? Animals learn, but we have the ability, because we use imagination, we can learn to learn. It distinguishes us from others. And from the time we're born until the time we get older, we are continually learning. Think about the dramatic changes, but it happens so slowly, we hardly realize. Look at yourself when you were an infant, look at yourself when you're a child, look at yourself now, and it's quite obvious there's been dramatic changes. And the very fact that the words we're using here, these words are changing us. When we change our words, we change our world. We change the reality of our world, the assumptions we make. So I think that's important to realize. We can change our assumptions. Remember the song in the South Pacific, you have to be taught hate? You know, we understand how easy it is to teach people to hate one another. We know how to teach people to hate, but we're not very good at teaching people to love one another. We haven't got that many courses. We get a lot of courses because the language, the words we created are words that are basically hate words. It's as soon as we say, we learn tribal words that says my way is the right way. So the very fact of what we're doing in this meeting, that these 7 word changes, if you think about it, they themselves can dramatically change our behavior. But I do agree that throughout history, it's usually crises that leads to change. When you generally don't change, but crises, and it's when you're put to a stress that you're demanded that you begin to make changes. So yes, crises can be a source of change. I'm also reminded of one of the person I respect was
Vincent Peale.
Norman Vincent Peale. And he said, you know, I get up every morning and I realize, he said, I have a choice. He says, I can make myself miserable today or I can make myself happy. And you know what? I'm not a fool. So when we learn to think in terms of, we learn to think in terms of creative thinking. That's what makes us different. We are creative. We're not just responding like animals where we learn. We can learn to learn. That's the critical skill. And how do we do that? We do that through our language. It's the words that makes us unique from every other creature on earth. We have the ability to engage in imagination, and that is the basis of our creativity. Think of all the things we create that are not in nature. This media that we're able to share our faces and look at one another when we're in different parts of the world is all part of somebody's creativity. You know, the automobile, the computer, all these are things because we've made dramatic changes because there was some need that somebody had. And they did it because of their ability to use language and imagination. So if we can teach ourselves the words, that the symbols that lead to action, what makes us unique is symbols are signals that turn on emotion. And it's not that it's either or. Can you think of them as being related, connected? And if we can learn that our world is connected, you know, the problem we have is because we think that if you're different color skin or you're different religion or you're different race or whatever, then you're different. If we can just change that simple word from either or to both end, again, all these words are so powerful and they all lead to change. We are getting late into our time, so I know we could go on. These discussions could go a lot longer. Usually, I think we should have an hour and a half meeting rather than an hour, but we set up an hour. But let's make our final comments. If you have some things you'd like to add, do so. And there's a lot of wisdom, obviously, to be gained, I think, from this wonderful strand that starts with, can we change our thinking instead of looking at the negative? Remember, one of the word switches was worry. We said there we have 8 choices. Our mind has the mental freedom control panel. One of our choices is worry, but we're innately addicted to worry. We innately think of the worst things that could happen to us because it was necessary for our animals and ancestors. They had to worry. They had to be concerned when they went to sleep. You know, what do I have to protect myself tomorrow? And that's one of the reasons why humor was not a part of our ancestors. Humor is a recent invention. Our ancestors didn't laugh. They didn't have humor. We've been able, because of our ability to think, to develop the ability to look at things that are difficult and learn to dispense their angst and anger and so on by using our imagination. So anyway, there's a lot of thoughts here, and you all have some. So make your last statements, and let's get the final wisdom we can out of this strand.
I've never been very fond of trying to reduce things to. Somebody want to get that? I've never been very fond of trying to reduce things to platitudes, but there is one I'm fond of because I think it does say something, and that is we can't. I have it on a little plaque in my office, and we cannot direct the wind, but we can adjust our sails. And it takes me back to when we were talking earlier about retirement, somebody talking about, do you ever have enough to retire? And I used to stress and fret and stew about what am I going to do when I retire. And one day I realized, I said, I'm looking at this the wrong way. I don't have to retire. And I don't plan to retire, which alleviates that problem right there in a way. As a matter of fact, I have retirement scheduled for just after I die, which is probably, well, that's one positive element of death. It makes mandatory retirement, right? So there'll be enough time for it then. And, you know, you may think I'm being facetious. I'm really not. I'm just saying that is one way to stop stewing about that particular problem and just look at it in a slightly different way. Don is chuckling because he thinks I'm totally nuts. And that's fine.
I will say, Brad, I have not adopted your plan for retirement.
It will adopt you. You don't have to.
Let's see. Earl, you haven't had any chance to say anything. Did you have
Well,
any comment?
I was thinking as I was listening this morning, there are religions that teach peace, and to get away from the demands that are made of upon ourselves each and every day. And everybody has to find his own peace from within, whether it incorporates religion or whether it incorporates poetry or whatever that happens to be. And peace from within has to be a very personal thing. And it has to be not affected by what the outside circumstances are. If you can go to that place of peace, you can think more creatively, you can use your imagination, but it's very difficult to do with your to-do list every single day. Getting away from that list and going to a place of peace in your mind, I think is so important and deserves a lot of practice in trying to expand upon it. And I have been working on that for quite a while. It's doable, and it's great. And yoga, by the way, I find is one of the ways to do it. I think yoga does work. It makes you focus in on yourself, and that I have found a place for peace in your mind is very important. It allows you to incorporate a lot of the things that we're learning here, and to review them and imagine outcomes in your mind without having to take the actual doing of something. So that's what this conversation this morning brought to mind for me.
Well, thank you all. My final comment is to go back to one of the word switches, that both and. It's a simple change. Simple that word change from either or. And we recognize that thinking, feeling, and actions are both and. They're connected. When you do yoga, don't you think first that you think I'm going to relax my mind? Can you imagine that part of this involves thinking differently? And it's only when we think differently. And what we're trying to do in these meetings, from my perspective, is what makes us unique. We're learning those critical new words that enable us to think in terms of a different way that leads to a new kind of behavior. But it takes a long time, once you're addicted to the old patterns of the opposite of these words, or the difference of words, when you're in the war, or what's a way of thinking of what's the good and the bad people. We talk about religion. Religions usually teach us tribal love. It's only you love the people in your religion, and the history of most religions has been the basis of many wars. People go to war for crusades, and reward people for going and killing other people. It's one of the assumptions that leads to hate. So if we can teach hate, I really believe we can just as well, and be much wiser to teach love. And the 4 qualities we talked about that I think you stand for: happiness, enough, love, and peace. If we can teach ourselves these skills, and they don't involve money, they don't involve good health. You don't even have to be in good health to teach to be happiness, enough, love, and peace, and wake up every day and have a day of chronic enthusiasm. Could you imagine enjoying each day? As the example we had in today's strand, an individual who was quadriplegic, and at least he seemed to be genuine when he said, every day I wake up with chronic enthusiasm. I look forward to helping other people. I look forward to my adopt a child, I looked forward to my relationship with my wife. He didn't say, oh my God, I can't feel anything from my neck down. Oh my God, somebody has to feed me because I don't have the ability to do that. Just that change of attitude. I mean, if that's not an identification of ability to change our way of thinking, because it's wiser, not because it's, a crisis started it. But yes, crisis usually is a creative change, but it doesn't, I'm not sure we have to, I don't think we have to become quadriplegic in order to change. I think we can do so out of wisdom because we can educate ourselves in the skills that are important. So thank you all for participating, and a lot to think about. And I hope you'll practice the 7+2 word switches, and you will wake up with chronic enthusiasm on a regular basis, and it feels wonderful. I am an example of a person who has changed my way of thinking, Pacey. So if you're looking for an example, I am it. I get up in the morning and I'm very enthusiastic about what I do. And maybe I could finish with a story, just a little story here. I take another moment because it involves your wife, Abby. Your wife worked for one of the most prestigious law firms in the world, with Cravath, Swaine, and Moore. They had the highest income average of any group of attorneys. That's the story she told, and I think it's true. Very prestigious law firm. And she described one of the partners in the firm, who was the world expert on a particular subject. It happened, I think, to be airplanes and financing of airplanes or something. And he was the world expert. People would come to him when they wanted advice. But he retired, and when he retired, he decided he moved to a small rural area, and he volunteered to be the towel boy in the local YMCA. So the story is, if you really wanted to find out the best advice, you didn't go to a lawyer or law firm, you went to ask for the towel boy in the local YMCA, and he could give you the best advice. But apparently he was very happy doing what he did, because when he had the choice, that's what he did. He changed his way of thinking. And I'm sure he didn't do it because it was a painful experience. He did it because that's what he chose to do. We had the critical issue is we have the choice if we exercise it. But we grow up with the idea that we grow up with that should again. You should be this way, and we live our life according to what other people tell us we should be, instead of learning to take responsibility for ourselves. I could, and what do I do to make my life happy and fulfilling? So, at any rate, thank you for allowing me to spout on a little. Some of you are saying, why is he talking so long? So he's exceeding his time. But it's one of the prerogatives of being the group leader. So thank you, and we'll see you all next week.
Okay.
Happy New Year,
We're going to
everybody.
have our business
Bye-bye.
meeting